What if an execution intended to silence a rebellion was the spark that ignited a revolution? What if the death of one man would light the fire that would burn through the heart of an empire? Picture a cold, gray morning in the year 1536. A large crowd has gathered in stark silence, their breathing misting in the chill of morning. They are there to watch this spectacle, their heads turned toward the scaffold ahead. Far away, clinking chains echo down the street. This is not an execution. This is a message, a warning. Before them stood a man whose name would reach across history even in those times following his death. William Tyndale, the translator of the Bible into English, stood in defiance against the very building blocks of the Catholic Church. In fact, for the common folk to have access to the Bible, Tyndale was arrested, tried, and condemned for heresy. What they did not know was that in trying to silence him, they had only made his words that much louder. As the executioner takes his place, preparing to carry out the sentence, the crowd is as still as it can get. The pyre has already been set ablantly, with flames ready to consume his body. But what they did not know, what they couldn't anticipate, was that this man's execution would start a revolution no one could stop. Let me step into that moment of time when history turned dark, a story of power, fear, and what the true cost was in the way of defiance. William Tyndale knew what was to come. He was not a fool. The clanging chains, cold stinging stone walls, always the prospect of death. Things he had lived with for months now. He had been arrested in Antwerp, dragged to the grim prison of Vilvoorde outside Brussels. It wasn't the physical torture that would break him, but the isolation. Tyndale languished in the dark for 500 days. Each passing prison day was another trial to his will, never bending. Closer to the hour of execution, he was led out from prison and escorted by guards through narrow streets up to the scaffold. The whole town of Vilvoorde was uncannily quiet, as if the air itself was strained, and there were hushed whispers through the crowd gathered in the square. There it stood, right in the middle. A scaffold, a high platform of wood, contrived for the ignoblest use imaginable. A fire was already burning under it, licking up its base with red tongues, and curling wreaths of smoke ascended into the air. As the executioner was lashing the rope around his neck, chains rattling, Tyndale was being stripped of dignity. His face, pale but unyielding, gave nothing away but a quiet strength. He was no martyr. He wasn't looking for glory. His belief was simple, yet revolutionary. The Bible should be accessible to all. For that belief, he would die. As the pyre beneath him was lit, the flames crackled and grew, licking the air. The crowd stood in silence, waiting for the inevitable. Yet Tyndale's final moments were not filled with terror or fear. His last words would reverberate through the annals of history. "Lord, open the King of England's eyes." But the fire wasn't the only thing that would burn that day. It was not just the flesh of William Tyndale that would be consumed. What they hadn't counted on was that the flames would give birth to something far more dangerous than any man's death. What the powers that be didn't catch on to at that very moment was that they weren't just killing a man. They were creating a martyr, a symbol, a legend. The time they were trying to snuff out the Protestant Reformation, they actually played into its hands. Tyndale's execution was a warning. Cross the church, and this is what will happen to you. But the sad irony was that his execution did not silence him. It catapulted his ideas forward. In only months after Tyndale's death, his Bible translations into the English language started spreading throughout Europe. His writings, which had been condemned, somehow filtered through to the common man and woman. What was once reserved for the priest and scholar now lay in the hands of any who could read. By this time, Tyndale's translation of the New Testament had already been smuggled into England and became a powerful tool in the hands of the reformers. It was a spark to the tinderbox of religious revolution. The English people, so long under the grip of the Catholic Church, began to question the power of the Pope, the priests, and the doctrines that had been imposed upon them. Tyndale's words were now alive, his spirit too. But what was even more amazing, as compared to the dissemination of Tyndale's Bible, was how it actually set a rippling movement upon the very monarchy that condemned him to death. King Henry VIII, who was being pursued for approval from the Church for the execution of Tyndale, surprisingly would eventually break ties with Rome itself. Henry declared himself head of the Church of England in 1534, apart from any control of the Pope. And Tyndale, his legacy continued through his Bible and through the revolution he had helped birth. His execution, an effort to squash dissent, had instead been the match to a fire that burned brighter with each passing day. His death was the spark, and the flames spread. What the authorities hadn't grasped was that ideas are not killed, they multiply. The execution of William Tyndale is a grim reminder of how far those in power will go to maintain control. It is so easy to see such a story and focus only on the brutality, the flames, the rope, the agony of his final moments. But the true tragedy lies in the manipulation of truth itself. In the 16th century, the Catholic Church was not only in control of religion, but also of knowledge. Through the control of the Bible by the Church, it controlled what people knew and were allowed to know and believe. The execution by burning of William Tyndale wasn't an execution. It was silencing the voice of reason, an attempt to keep at bay the truth. But the story of Tyndale is one of hope, too, of resistance, of the power of words. In a world where information was a tool of oppression, Tyndale gave his life in the ultimate sacrifice to give it back to the people. He was of the conviction that knowledge was a right and not a privilege. And even as the flames of his execution were to erase his influence, they only made it stronger. In many ways, the life and death of Tyndale eerily mirror the struggles of today. How often does the concept of truth get manipulated, and how often do the powers that be seek to control the narrative in such a way as to keep them in some semblance of societal control? Tyndale's story forces us to confront these questions. It challenges us to reflect on the price of knowledge and its suppression. Perhaps the most powerful part of this story is the lesson it leaves us with. Ideas, just like fire, cannot be contained. They can only be buried for a time. They will always find their way to rise again, and when they do, they burn brighter than before. Was Tyndale's punishment justified or a tragic abuse of power? How do you think this story parallels our world today? Please let me know in the comments below. If you found this story captivating, please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more untold chapters of history. We have many powerful tales about courage, revolution, and truth that are yet to be found.